The conference room on the 43rd floor smelled like leather and cold ambition. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city stretched endlessly, a grid of glass towers catching the afternoon light like mirrors aimed at the sun. Inside, 12 men in charcoal suits sat around a table made from a single slab of polished walnut. Their phones face down, their expressions carved from the same expensive stone as the building itself. Marcus Holloway stood at the head of that table, his hands pressed flat against the wood, feeling the cool surface against his palms. At 52, he'd built Holloway Industries from a single patent into an empire worth $3.7 billion. His silver hair was cut precisely. His navy suit fit like a second skin. Everything about him communicated control, precision, the kind of success that made other men sit up straighter when he entered a room. But today, something felt wrong. "The Shanghai deal closes Friday," said Gerald Vance, his CFO sliding a leather portfolio across the table. "All signatures secured. The factory acquisition will triple our manufacturing capacity in Southeast Asia." Marcus picked up the portfolio, flipped through pages dense with legal language, columns of projected revenue, charts showing growth trajectories that climbed like stairways to heaven. $280 million, the largest single transaction of his career. 6 months of negotiations, 3 trips to China, endless video conferences that stretched into the small hours of the morning. "The wire transfers are scheduled," added Patricia Chen, her head of legal. She was a woman who'd never lost a contract dispute, whose mind worked like a calculator designed for warfare. "Everything's in order. We just need your final authorization." Marcus stared at the numbers. Something whispered at the edge of his thoughts, like static on a radio almost tuned to the right frequency. He couldn't name it, couldn't point to a specific line item or clause that troubled him. But 30 years in business had taught him to trust that whisper. "Give me until tomorrow," he said. The room shifted. Briefcases clicked open and closed. Patricia's pen stopped moving. Gerald leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. "Marcus, we've been over this deal 17 times, Gerald said, his voice carrying the patience of a man explaining basic arithmetic to a child. "Every number checks out. Every projection is conservative. If we delay, we risk the Shanghai partners getting cold feet." "Tomorrow," Marcus repeated, and his tone ended the conversation. They filed out, 12 men and women whose annual salaries could fund a small town's budget, their expressions ranging from concern to poorly concealed frustration. Patricia lingered at the door. "You're not usually indecisive," she said quietly. "I'm not being indecisive. I'm being careful." She nodded, understanding something in his face that the others had missed, and left him alone with the skyline and his doubts. Marcus gathered the documents into his briefcase, a leather bag that had traveled with him through 23 countries, worn soft at the edges from years of use. He loosened his tie as the elevator descended, watching the numbers decrease, feeling the subtle pressure change in his ears. The lobby opened before him like a cathedral built to commerce. Marble floors, brass fixtures, a ceiling 3 stories high where light poured through geometric skylights. His driver waited at the curb, but Marcus waved him away. "I'll walk." Thomas, who'd driven for him for 8 years, raised his eyebrows, but didn't argue. "Your dinner reservation is at 7, sir. The Meridian." Marcus checked his watch. 4:30. He had time. He needed air, needed to move, needed something other than the recycled atmosphere of boardrooms and corner offices. The city swallowed him. New York in October carried a specific quality of light, golden and slanted, making even the concrete seem warm. He walked without direction, letting his feet choose the path, his mind circling the Shanghai deal like a hawk looking for movement in tall grass. What was he missing? The factory had been inspected. The title was clear. The local government had approved all permits. The projected savings on labor and materials were conservative, backed by 3 independent analyses. So why did his gut twist every time he thought about signing? His phone buzzed. He ignored it. It buzzed again and again. He pulled it out. 17 messages in the past hour. Investors wanting updates, board members wanting confirmation, his ex-wife wanting to discuss their daughter's college tuition, even though he'd already paid it twice over. Everyone wanted something. He silenced the phone and kept walking. The streets grew narrower. The towers gave way to older buildings, brownstones with iron railings, small shops with hand-painted signs. He passed a bookstore with stacks visible through the window, a bakery where the smell of fresh bread rolled out like an invitation, a barber shop where an old man sat reading a newspaper in the one chair, waiting for customers who might never come. Marcus realized he was hungry, actually hungry, not the polite appetite that appeared at business dinners where every course was calculated to impress. His stomach felt hollow. He couldn't remember if he'd eaten lunch. Probably not. Probably just coffee. 3 cups before the board meeting, bitter and strong. He found himself on a side street he'd never noticed before, though he'd worked in this city for 3 decades. A small restaurant occupied the ground floor of a narrow building. Its windows steamed from the warmth inside. A simple sign hung above the door, Rosie's Kitchen. Through the glass, he could see checkered tablecloths, mismatched chairs, walls covered in old photographs and handwritten menus. It looked nothing like the places where he usually ate. No valet parking, no reservations required 3 weeks in advance, no sommelier to guide you through wines that cost more than most people's monthly rent. He pushed open the door. The warmth hit him first, then the smell, something rich and savory. Onions and garlic, bread baking somewhere in the back. A dozen tables filled the narrow space, most of them occupied. A family in the corner, the children coloring on paper placemats. A couple sharing a basket of bread, leaning close in conversation. An old man eating soup alone, a book propped open beside his bowl. "Sit anywhere you like, honey." The voice came from behind the counter. A woman in her 60s, gray hair pulled back, flour dusting her forearms. She smiled at him with the casual warmth of someone who'd smiled at 10,000 strangers and meant it every time. Marcus chose a table by the window, set his briefcase beside the chair, and finally allowed himself to exhale. A younger woman appeared, late 20s, dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail, wearing jeans and a white t-shirt under an apron that had seen better days. She carried a water glass and a laminated menu that had been wiped clean so many times the plastic had started to peel at the corners. "Welcome to Rosie's," she said, setting the water down with the careful attention of someone who'd learned not to spill. Her voice carried a slight accent he couldn't quite place, maybe Eastern European, maybe Russian. "Do you need a minute, or do you know what you want?" Marcus looked at the menu. Everything was handwritten, items crossed out and replaced with new specials. Meatloaf, chicken soup, pot roast, food that belonged in another era, simpler and more honest than anything he'd eaten in years. "What's good?" he asked. She tilted her head, considering him with dark eyes that seemed older than her face. "Everything, but the pot roast is special today. Rosie makes it with red wine and carrots. It falls apart when you look at it." "That," Marcus said. "Please." She wrote it down on a small pad, and he noticed her hands. Strong hands, nails cut short, a thin white scar across her right thumb. Working hands. "You want coffee?" she asked. "Please." She disappeared into the kitchen, and Marcus let himself settle into the chair, feeling muscles in his shoulders relax that had been tight since the morning meeting. Maybe longer. Maybe months. He pulled out his phone, saw 43 new messages, and put it away again. The coffee arrived in a heavy ceramic mug, hot and strong, exactly what he needed. The waitress, he glanced at her name tag, Elena, set it down with a small pitcher of cream. "Food'll be about 10 minutes," she said. "No rush." She smiled, a quick flash that changed her whole face, and moved to the next table. Marcus watched her work. There was an efficiency to her movements, a grace that came from repetition and care. She refilled waters without being asked, cleared plates with 2 hands, remembered who wanted more bread and who was still working on their salad. She moved through the narrow space between tables like water finding its path, never wasting motion, never hurrying, but never slow. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. He felt suddenly embarrassed, like he'd been caught staring at something he shouldn't. But she just smiled again and disappeared into the kitchen. The pot roast arrived on a white plate, simple and perfect. Meat that had been cooking for hours, carrots glazed with reduced wine, mashed potatoes with a pool of butter melting in the center. Elena set it down with a fork and knife wrapped in a paper napkin. "Careful," she said, "the plate's hot." Marcus took a bite and closed his eyes. It tasted like his grandmother's house, like Sunday dinners from a childhood 50 years gone. The meat dissolved on his tongue, the sauce rich and deep, the kind of flavor that only came from patience and attention. "Good?" Elena asked, pausing at his table with the coffee pot. "Exceptional." "I'll tell Rosie. She'll be happy." Elena topped off his cup even though he'd barely touched it. "You look tired, if you don't mind me saying." I laughed, surprised. "That obvious?" "I've been waitressing 12 years. You learn to read faces." She set the pot down on the table, studying him with those dark eyes. "Let me guess. Big decision? Something keeping you up at night?" He didn't know why he answered honestly. Maybe because she was a stranger, maybe because something in her voice suggested she'd understand. "The biggest deal of my career. Everything says I should sign, but something feels off." Elena nodded slowly. "My father used to say, when the head and the heart disagree, check the math one more time. There's usually something small you missed." "Your father sounds wise." He was. Past tense. A small window into grief. Accountant back in Moscow. He could find an error in a 1,000-page ledger just by looking at it. Said numbers always tell the truth if you know how to listen. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. "That's good advice." "It's why I'm good at this," Elena said, gesturing at the restaurant. "I remember who ordered what, who paid what, who needs change. Numbers make sense to me. People too, usually." She picked up the coffee pot and moved to the next table, leaving Marcus with his thoughts and his dinner. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, feeling some of the tension drain from his body with each forkful. Around him, the restaurant hummed with quiet conversation. The old man finished his soup and left a $5 bill under his bowl. The couple shared a slice of apple pie, feeding each other with the comfortable intimacy of people who'd been together long enough to stop performing. The family's children laughed at something, a sound like bells. Marcus finished his meal and sat back, feeling more satisfied than he had in months. Not just the food, the place itself, the simplicity of it, the absence of pretense. No one here knew who he was. No one wanted anything from him except maybe a decent tip. Elena returned with his check, handwritten on a green pad. Pot roast special, coffee, $8.50. He looked at the number for a long moment. Then he pulled out his wallet and placed $200 bills on top of the check. Elena picked up the money, counted it twice, and looked at him with confusion shifting into concern. "Sir, I can't take this. The meal was $8.50. "I know. The rest is for you." That's almost $400 tip. That's too much." It's exactly right. For the pot roast and for the advice. Elena stood there, holding the bills like they might burst into flame. I didn't do anything. You reminded me to check the math one more time. I'd checked it 17 times already. What could possibly be wrong? You're sure? This is more than I make in a week. Marcus paused at the threshold, looking back at the warm light of Rosie's kitchen, at this young woman with her dark eyes and scarred hands, and the kind of honest wisdom that came from paying attention to the world. I'm sure. Thank you, Elena. He stepped out into the October evening, leaving her standing in the doorway, $200 bills clutched in her hands, her expression caught between disbelief and something that might have been hope. The walk back to his apartment took 40 minutes. Marcus used every second of it to think. Elena's words circled in his mind like a song he couldn't shake. Check the math one more time. He'd checked it 17 times already. What could possibly be wrong? But the feeling persisted, that whisper at the edge of consciousness. When he reached his building, a glass tower in the financial district, where apartments started at $5 million, he bypassed the elevator to the penthouse and headed to his private office on the 40th floor. His assistant had left hours ago. The space was dark, except for the city lights bleeding through the windows. He spread the Shanghai contract across his desk, all 237 pages of it. Then he pulled up the supporting documents on his computer. The factory inspection reports, the title searches, the environmental assessments, the financial projections prepared by 3 separate firms. And he started reading. Not skimming this time, actually reading. Every word, every number, every footnote and appendix and schedule attached as exhibits. His eyes burned, his back ached. Coffee went cold in the cup beside his keyboard. Outside, the city moved through its nightly rhythms, office lights winking out, restaurant lights glowing brighter, the distant sound of sirens and car horns, and the eternal music of 8 million people trying to survive another day. At 2 in the morning, Marcus found it. The detail was buried on page 183 in a subsection of a subsection, in language so dense it read like poetry written by lawyers having a stroke. A single clause about production capacity, expressed as a percentage rather than raw numbers. The factory could produce 5 million units annually at current efficiency rates. He pulled up the inspection reports. The machinery was old, not disastrously old, but old enough that maintenance records showed increasing repairs over the past 3 years. Nothing catastrophic, just a gradual decline, the kind of slow erosion that happened to all mechanical systems. He opened a spreadsheet, started calculating. If efficiency dropped just 8%, completely reasonable given the equipment age, the factory's actual capacity would be 4.6 million units. Their entire business model assumed 5 million. That gap would cost them approximately $47 million in the first year alone. But that wasn't the real problem. The real problem was in the third-party analysis prepared by Westbrook Consulting. They'd assessed the factory's value based on the 5 million unit capacity. Their entire valuation assumed that number was solid, which meant if the actual capacity was lower, they weren't buying a factory worth $280 million. They were buying a factory worth maybe $220 million. A $60 million overestimate. Marcus leaned back in his chair, feeling his heart pound. How had 3 independent analyses missed this? How had his own team, including Gerald, who'd worked mergers and acquisitions for 27 years, not caught it? Because everyone had taken the 5 million units at face value. Because the number appeared in the factory specifications, in the seller's materials, in document after document, repeated so many times it became truth through sheer volume. Nobody had questioned the phrase, "at current efficiency rates." Nobody had dug into the maintenance records to see the slow decline. Nobody except the pattern-seeking part of his brain that had been screaming at him since the board meeting. He picked up his phone, saw it was 2:15 in the morning, and called Gerald anyway. "This better be an emergency." Gerald's voice was thick with sleep. "The Shanghai deal. We need to halt it." Silence. Then, "Marcus, what are you talking about?" "The factory capacity is overstated, maybe by 10%, maybe more. The valuation is wrong. We had 3 firms analyze. They all use the same baseline assumption. It's wrong. I'll explain tomorrow, first thing. But call Patricia, tell her to delay the wire transfer." "Marcus, if we pull out now," "We're not pulling out. We're renegotiating. There's a difference." Marcus rubbed his eyes, feeling exhaustion and adrenaline warring in his bloodstream. "Trust me, Gerald, this is real." Another pause, then, "Okay, I'll call Patricia, but this better be as solid as you think it is." "It is. I'll prove it in the morning." He hung up and sat in the dark office, looking out at the city. Somewhere down there, Elena was probably asleep, maybe in a small apartment she could barely afford, probably sharing it with roommates because New York rented for the price of blood. She had no idea that her father's advice, passed through her to a stranger in a restaurant, had just saved that stranger $60 million. Or maybe prevented him from losing $60 million. Same thing, different angle. Marcus thought about the $200 bills he'd left on that green check. Suddenly they seemed both absurdly generous and completely inadequate. He worked until dawn, building his case, documenting every assumption and calculation. By the time the sun rose over the East River, painting the glass towers gold, he had 47 pages of analysis proving the factory's real value was significantly less than advertised. Gerald arrived at 7, looking rumpled and irritated. Patricia came at 7:15, carrying the largest coffee Marcus had ever seen. They sat in his office while he walked them through the numbers, showing them the clause everyone had missed, the maintenance records everyone had overlooked, the slow decline in efficiency that should have been obvious but had been hidden in plain sight. "Jesus," Gerald said when Marcus finished. "How did we miss this?" "Because we saw what we expected to see," Patricia said quietly. She was already making notes, her legal mind shifting into gear. "We have grounds to renegotiate. This constitutes a material misrepresentation of asset value." "Do we kill the deal entirely?" Gerald asked. Marcus considered. "No. The factory's still valuable, just not as valuable as advertised. We renegotiate based on realistic capacity. Probably knock 40 to 50 million off the purchase price. If they won't budge, then we walk." Patricia nodded. "I'll draft new terms. This is going to piss off Shanghai." "Better pissed off than bankrupt," Marcus said. "Gerald, get our manufacturing team on the phone. I want a complete reanalysis of that equipment, realistic projections for the next 5 years, and I want to know how our due diligence missed this." They left him alone with the sunrise and the certain knowledge that he just dodged a bullet, maybe not a fatal bullet. Holloway Industries was strong enough to absorb a $60 million mistake, but bullets didn't need to be fatal to hurt. He thought about calling Elena, telling her what her advice had done, but he didn't have her number, didn't even know her last name, just a waitress at a small restaurant, a woman with scarred hands and her father's wisdom, who'd reminded him to check the math. The day moved forward with the momentum of water breaking through a dam. The board meeting at 10, where Marcus explained the problem and the solution, watching faces shift from alarm to relief. The conference call with Shanghai at noon, where accusations flew like knives before Patricia's calm legal precision cut through the emotion to establish facts. The revised offer drafted by 3:30, submitted by 4. By 6 o'clock, Marcus stood alone in his office again, watching the city transition from day to night, feeling the weight of crisis lift from his shoulders. His phone buzzed. Shanghai had accepted the revised terms. The deal would close at $225 million instead of $280 million. $55 million saved because he trusted his instincts and a waitress's father's advice. He grabbed his coat and left the building, not bothering to tell his assistant where he was going. The walk to Rosie's kitchen took 25 minutes. The streets were crowded with the after-work rush, people flooding out of office buildings like water from burst pipes, everyone desperate to reclaim a few hours of their own lives before the cycle started again. The restaurant was busier than yesterday, nearly every table full. The same warm light spilled through the windows. The same smells rolled out when he opened the door. Tonight, it was something tomato-based, garlic and basil, making his mouth water. Elena was at the counter, taking a phone order, the handset tucked between her shoulder and ear while she wrote on a pad. She looked up when the bell over the door chimed, and her face registered surprise. "Just 1 second," she said into the phone, then covered the microphone. "You came back." "I came back." She finished the phone order, hung up, and walked over, wiping her hands on her apron. "Let me guess, the pot roast was that good." "The pot roast was excellent, but I came to say thank you." Elena tilted her head, puzzled. "For what? You already left a huge tip. I'm still trying to figure out what I did to deserve it." Marcus glanced around the restaurant. Too many people, too many ears. "Is there somewhere we could talk, just for a minute?" She studied his face, and he saw her calculating risk, weighing possibilities. A strange man asking her to step away from the public space. But something in his expression must have satisfied her, because she nodded. "Rosie," she called toward the kitchen, "I'm taking 5. An older woman's head poked out, the same one Marcus had seen yesterday, gray hair and flour-dusted arms. "Make it quick, honey, we're slammed." Elena led him out the back door into a narrow alley where dumpsters sat, and the smell of garbage mixed with cigarette smoke from somewhere nearby. Not romantic, not even particularly pleasant, but private. "Okay," Elena said, crossing her arms. "What's this about?" Marcus took a breath. "Yesterday, you told me your father's advice about checking the math when your head and heart disagree. Yeah? I took that advice. I went back to my office and spent the entire night going through a contract, the biggest deal of my career, and I found something, a mistake everyone else had missed, an assumption that was wrong." He paused, watching her face. "That mistake would have cost my company approximately $60 million. Elena's eyes went wide. Wait, million? Like million? Million. She leaned back against the brick wall, processing. "Holy shit. Yeah. And you found it because of what I said? About my father?" "I found it because you reminded me to trust my instincts, to look one more time, even when everyone else said everything was fine." Marcus pulled an envelope from his inside jacket pocket. "I wanted you to know, and I wanted to give you this." Elena took the envelope carefully, like it might explode. She opened it and pulled out a check. Her hands started shaking. This is $50,000? "Yes." "I can't. She looked up at him, tears suddenly bright in her eyes. "This is insane. I didn't do anything worth this." "You saved me $60 million. 50,000 is less than 1% of that. If anything, I'm being cheap." Elena laughed, a sound caught between joy and disbelief, and something that might have been panic. "I don't even know your name." Marcus Holloway. "I'm Elena Volkov." She held out her hand, and he shook it. That strong, scarred hand that had carried thousands of plates, poured thousands of cups of coffee, done honest work for honest pay. "I still don't understand why you're doing this." "Because sometimes people help us without realizing it, and when they do, we should say thank you." He smiled. "And because your father was right. Numbers always tell the truth, if you know how to listen." Tears spilled down Elena's cheeks. She wiped them away, quickly, embarrassed. "My father died 3 years ago. Heart attack. He was only 61. I think about him every day, wonder what he'd think of me working here, whether he'd be disappointed I'm not an accountant like him." "He'd be proud," Marcus said quietly. "You took his wisdom and passed it on. That matters more than any job title."
Elena looked at the check again, then folded it carefully and put it in her apron pocket. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything. Just keep being you. Keep paying attention. Keep remembering what your father taught you." Rosie's voice bellowed from inside. "Elena, I need you!" Elena laughed again, wiping her face. "I have to go. But thank you. This is going to change my life. My mother, she's been sick. I've been trying to help with bills. This is everything." "Good. Use it well." She started toward the door, then turned back. "Will you come have dinner, please? Rosie will want to meet you, and I'll make sure the pot roast is extra good." Marcus smiled. "I'd like that." He followed her inside, back into the warmth and noise of the restaurant, and let Elena seat him at the same table by the window. She brought him coffee without asking, her hands still shaking slightly, her eyes bright with tears she was trying to hide from the other customers. The pot roast was excellent. But more than that, sitting in Rosie's kitchen while Elena worked, watching her move through the tables with that same efficient grace, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in years. Connected. Grounded. Part of something real and human that had nothing to do with stock prices or board meetings or contracts worth hundreds of millions. When he left, 3 hours later, full of pot roast and apple pie and coffee so strong it could wake the dead, Elena walked him to the door. "Thank you," she said again, "for everything. Thank you for saving me from making the biggest mistake of my career." Outside, the October night had turned cold. Marcus pulled his coat tighter and walked home through streets that felt different somehow, more alive, more textured, full of stories he'd been too busy to notice before. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with messages. The Shanghai deal, now renegotiated, was the talk of the industry. Everyone wanted to know how he'd caught the error, how he'd pulled off the save. But he didn't answer any of them. Instead, he walked slowly, thinking about Elena and her father's wisdom, about small restaurants and strangers who changed your life without meaning to, about the strange and wonderful ways the universe sometimes worked when you paid attention. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. The factory purchase would need to be managed, the manufacturing ramp-up coordinated, 1,000 details attended to. But tonight, Marcus just walked and thought, and felt grateful for pot roast, strong coffee, and a waitress who'd reminded him to check the math one more time. Sometimes salvation came from unexpected places. Sometimes the most important advice came from people who didn't even know they were giving it. Sometimes you had to lose yourself in the noise of ambition before you could hear the quiet voice telling you to look again, to trust yourself, to remember that numbers, like people, always tell the truth if you know how to listen. Marcus woke the next morning with sunlight streaming through his bedroom windows, the kind of clear October light that made the city look scrubbed clean. He'd slept better than he had in months. No ambition dreams, no crisis scenarios playing on loop, just deep, dreamless sleep, the kind that came from knowing you'd avoided catastrophe. His phone showed 63 messages. He ignored them and made coffee in his kitchen, a space of marble and steel that cost more than most people's houses, but somehow felt emptier than Rosie's cramped restaurant. The coffee was excellent. Single-origin beans from Guatemala, ground fresh, brewed at precisely 196 degrees. But it didn't taste as good as the bitter, oversteeped coffee Elena had poured from a pot that probably been sitting on a burner for 3 hours. He drank it anyway, looking out at the city, thinking about the strange mathematics of value. A cup of coffee at Rosie's cost $2. The coffee in his hand probably cost $7 per cup if you calculated the price of the beans and the elaborate machine required to brew them properly. But which one mattered more? Which one had changed his life?
The thought stayed with him through his shower, through the ritual of dressing in another perfectly tailored suit, through the elevator ride down to where Thomas waited with the car. It stayed with him during the morning commute, watching the city wake up around him. Delivery trucks double-parked, street vendors setting up carts, the endless flow of people heading to jobs they probably didn't love but needed to survive. "Good morning, Mr. Holloway," Thomas said, meeting his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I heard about the Shanghai deal. Word is you saved the company millions." "Word travels fast." "It does when you're the subject of it, sir." Thomas pulled into traffic with the easy confidence of a man who'd navigated these streets for decades. "If you don't mind me saying, you seem different today." "Different how?" "Lighter, like someone took weight off your shoulders." Marcus smiled. Maybe someone did. The office building rose before them, 43 stories of glass and steel, housing 3,000 people working to make Holloway Industries bigger, richer, more dominant. Marcus had built this empire one decision at a time, one risk at a time, one sleepless night at a time. It was his legacy, his identity, the thing that defined him when people said his name. But this morning, walking through the lobby, riding the elevator to the executive floor, settling into his corner office with his view of the city, Marcus found himself thinking less about his empire and more about a small restaurant where a waitress worked 12-hour shifts for tips that might add up to $80 on a good day. Gerald appeared in his doorway at 8:15, carrying folders and wearing the expression of a man who'd spent the night putting out fires. "Shanghai accepted the revised terms," he said, dropping into the chair across from Marcus's desk. "But they're not happy. There's some noise about reputation damage, implications we were trying to cheat them. Let them make noise. The facts speak for themselves. Patricia wants a team meeting at 10 to discuss implementation timeline, and the board wants a formal report on how this error happened in the first place." Gerald leaned back, studying Marcus. "You're being very calm about all this." "Because we caught it. That's what matters." "You caught it. Nobody else did. Not me, not Patricia, not the 3 consulting firms we paid a combined $2 million to analyze this deal." Gerald's voice carried equal parts admiration and irritation. "How?" "I considered how to answer. I could explain the clause on page 183, the maintenance records, the slow decline in efficiency that everyone had missed, but that wasn't really the answer." "I listened to a waitress," he said. Gerald blinked. "You what?" "I was having dinner. The waitress gave me advice, her father's advice, actually, and it made me look at the contract one more time." "A waitress?" "Her father was an accountant. Said numbers always tell the truth if you know how to listen." Gerald stared at him for a long moment, trying to decide if Marcus was joking. "You're serious?" "Completely. We almost blew $60 million and we were saved by a waitress quoting her dead father. That's about the size of it." Gerald laughed, a sound that started as surprise and grew into genuine amusement. "That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And somehow it's perfect." He stood, gathering his folders. 10 o'clock meeting. Try to have a more professional explanation ready for the board." After he left, Marcus sat alone with his coffee and his thoughts. The morning proceeded with its usual momentum, emails, phone calls, decisions that needed making. But his mind kept wandering back to Rosie's kitchen, to Elena's scarred hands and dark eyes, to the envelope in her apron pocket that would change her life in ways she probably couldn't imagine yet. At noon, instead of eating in the executive dining room, Marcus slipped out of the building and walked to a small park 3 blocks away. The October air was crisp, carrying the smell of fallen leaves and distant rain. He sat on a bench and watched people move through their days. Mothers with strollers, old men feeding pigeons, young couples holding hands and planning futures. His phone rang. His daughter, Maya. He answered immediately. "Dad, I heard about your Shanghai deal. That was close, huh? Maya was 23, finishing her MBA at Stanford, already smarter about business than Marcus had been at her age. She had her mother's sharp intelligence and his stubborn determination, a combination that would either make her a titan or burn her out by 35. It was close, Marcus admitted, but we caught it in time. How? The whole industry's talking about how 3 different consulting firms missed whatever you found. He told her the story, the restaurant, the waitress, the advice that had made him look one more time. Maya listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. When she finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's actually beautiful, Dad." "What is?" "That you were saved by someone just doing their job, being kind, sharing what they learned from their father." She paused. "You know what the best part is? She didn't even know she was helping. She was just being human. That's why I gave her $50,000. Whistle! Generous, but appropriate. Dad, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When's the last time you were just human? Not Marcus Holloway, CEO, not the man with the $3.7 billion company. Just you, being real with someone." The question landed like a punch. Marcus watched a pigeon strut across the path, pecking at invisible crumbs, and tried to remember. "I don't know," he said finally. "Maybe when I was having dinner at that restaurant." "Exactly." Maya's voice was gentle. "Dad, I love you. I'm proud of you. But sometimes I think you've spent so long being successful that you've forgotten how to just exist. Mom said the same thing, remember, before the divorce?" Marcus remembered. The fights that weren't really fights, just 2 people talking past each other in the language of disappointment. His ex-wife, Caroline, had been a painter when they met. Brilliant, fierce, full of color. By the time they divorced, she'd stopped painting entirely, said she couldn't find the light anymore. He'd never understood what she meant until this moment, sitting on a park bench, his daughter's words echoing in his ear. "You might be right," he admitted. "I usually am." You can hear her smile. "Listen, I have to run to class, but Dad, go back to that restaurant. Have dinner again. Be the version of yourself who tips $200 just because someone gave good advice. Not because it's good PR or because you should, but because it makes you feel human." "When did you get so wise?" "Probably genetic. Love you, Dad." "Love you too, sweetheart." He sat in the park for another 20 minutes, thinking about humanity and success and the space between them. His phone kept buzzing. Patricia with contract updates, board members wanting details, investors smelling profit in the renegotiated deal. The world wanted pieces of him, wanted his time and attention and the particular genius that had built an empire. But what he wanted, sitting there in the autumn sun, was more pot roast and bad coffee and conversations with a waitress who saw him as just another customer who needed feeding. The afternoon dissolved in meetings. The 10 o'clock with Patricia stretched to noon as they refined implementation timelines. The board call at 2 became a 3-hour deep dive into risk management and due diligence processes. By 5 o'clock, Marcus had talked himself hoarse and made 47 decisions that would ripple through the company like stones dropped in water. He left the office at 6, waving off Thomas and choosing to walk again. The city was beautiful in the early evening light. Buildings catching the sunset, windows turning to gold. He walked without destination at first, letting his feet choose the path, and wasn't surprised when they led him back toward Rosie's kitchen. The restaurant was busy when he arrived, every table full, a small crowd waiting near the door. The same warm light, the same good smells. Through the window, he could see Elena moving between tables, her ponytail swinging as she balanced plates, refilled water glasses, and laughed at something an older customer said. Marcus pushed open the door and the bell chimed. Elena looked up, saw him, and her face lit up with a smile so genuine it made something in his chest tighten. "You came back again," she said, navigating through the crowd to reach him. "I told you I would." "Yeah, but people say a lot of things they don't mean." She glanced at the waiting crowd. "It's going to be about 20 minutes for a table, unless you want to sit at the counter."
Counter's perfect. She led him to the only open stool, at the far end of the counter, where he could watch both the restaurant and the pass-through window to the kitchen. The same gray-haired woman, Rosie, presumably, was visible through the window, moving with the controlled chaos of someone who'd been cooking professionally for decades. "Coffee?" Elena asked. "Please." She poured from a pot that definitely been sitting too long, and it tasted perfect. Marcus wrapped his hands around the heavy ceramic mug and felt something settle in his chest, some tension he hadn't realized he was carrying. "So," Elena said, leaning against the counter, "did you really save $60 million, or were you exaggerating to impress the waitress?" Marcus laughed. $55 million, actually. The final renegotiation split the difference." "Jesus," she shook her head. "I still can't believe my father's advice did that. He would have been so proud, and probably would have charged you a consulting fee. He would have earned it." Elena started to respond, but Rosie's voice cut through the noise. "Elena, order up." "Duty calls," Elena said, pushing off the counter. "You want the pot roast again, or you want to try something different? Surprise me." Dangerous words in a restaurant. But she was smiling as she moved away. Marcus sat at the counter, sipping bad coffee and watching the choreography of the restaurant. It was remarkable how much coordination was required. The timing of orders, the flow of plates from kitchen to table, the constant calculation of who needed what and when. Elena moved through it all with practiced grace, and he realized she was doing mental math constantly, tracking orders, managing timing, calculating bills. Her father's gift, alive in her. She returned 15 minutes later with a plate of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans that had been cooked with bacon and onions until they were soft and savory. Rosie's specialty. She makes it with 3 different kinds of meat, and this secret spice blend she won't tell anyone.
Marcus took a bite and understood why it was a secret worth keeping. The meat was tender, the flavor complex and rich, the kind of food that belonged in a different era when people cooked with attention instead of speed. "Good?" Elena asked. "Exceptional. I'll add it to your list of favorites." She refilled his coffee. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "What's it like having that much money, making decisions where millions of dollars are just numbers on a page?" Marcus considered the question while he chewed. It was the kind of thing people rarely ask directly, usually dancing around wealth with careful politeness. Honestly, most of the time it's abstract. Numbers in accounts, projections on spreadsheets. It doesn't feel real until you convert it into something tangible. He gestured with his fork. "Like, I can tell you my company is worth $3.7 billion, but that's just math. It doesn't mean anything until I turn it into something. A building, a salary, a check to someone who needs it. Like the $50,000 you gave me." "Like that, yes." Elena was quiet for a moment, wiping down the counter even though it was already clean. "I deposited that check this morning. Took 3 hours because the bank thought it was fraud. I had to explain like 5 times that no, really, some rich guy I'd never met gave it to me for telling him to check his math." Marcus smiled. "Did they believe you eventually?" "Eventually, after calling you to verify. Your assistant was very confused about why her boss was giving waitresses enormous checks. I should probably explain that to her." "Probably." Elena leaned against the counter again, her expression turning serious. "I paid off my mother's medical bills this afternoon. All of them. 3 years of debt. Just gone." She cried for an hour. Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest. "I'm glad." "She wants to meet you. Thinks you're some kind of angel." She laughed. "I told her you're just a businessman who got lucky with a waitress's advice. But she's very Russian. She sees divine providence everywhere." "Maybe she's right. Maybe there's more providence in the world than we usually notice." "That's a very unbusinessman thing to say."
I'm trying to be less businessman and more human. My daughter's orders. Elena studied him with those dark, intelligent eyes. You have a daughter? Maya. She's 23, getting her MBA at Stanford. Probably going to end up running a company bigger than mine. You sound proud. I am. She's brilliant and kind. Much better at being human than I am. Marcus took another bite of meatloaf. What about you? Family besides your mother? Just her. My father, he died 3 years ago. I have some cousins back in Moscow, but we don't talk much. Elena's expression shifted, old grief moving across her face like weather. It's been hard, just the two of us. Mom can't work anymore. Her arthritis is bad. So I work here, pick up extra shifts when I can. Or I did before someone gave me more money than I've ever seen in my life.
What will you do with it, besides the medical bills? She hesitated, as if speaking the dream aloud might break it. I want to go back to school. I started an accounting degree before my father got sick, had to drop out to work full-time. I've always wanted to finish. Honor his memory, you know. You should do it. Maybe. It's scary, though. I'm almost 30. Everyone else in the classes will be 21, 22. And what if I'm not good enough? What if I spent all this time thinking I'm smart with numbers, but I'm really just good at remembering who ordered what? Marcus set down his fork and looked at her directly. Elena, you saw a pattern in a stranger's face that led him to check math that 3 professional consulting firms had missed. You remember orders, prices, timing, all while managing human emotions and keeping customers happy. That's not just being good with numbers. That's having a mind that sees connections other people miss. You'll be brilliant in those classes. She blinked rapidly, fighting tears. You really think so? I know so. And I'll write you a recommendation letter if you need one. To whom it concern, Elena Volkov saved my company $55 million by reminding me to check my math. She should probably be teaching the accounting classes, not taking them. Elena laughed, wiping her eyes. That's the worst recommendation letter I've ever heard. But it's true. Yeah. She smiled. It's true. Rosie's voice called from the kitchen. Elena, we need you. I really have to work, Elena said, but thank you. For the money, for the encouragement, for just being here, being real. Thank you for the same. Marcus finished his meatloaf slowly, savoring every bite, watching the restaurant flow around him, an old couple at a corner table, holding hands across the checkered tablecloth. A young woman working on a laptop, eating soup with one hand and typing with the other. A man about Marcus's age, reading the newspaper, methodically working through a plate of chicken and rice. Regular people, living regular lives, finding small moments of comfort in good food and warm spaces. How many years had Marcus spent ignoring this? How many restaurants had he passed? How many Elena Volkovs had he never noticed? Too busy building empires to see the actual world happening around him. He paid his bill. Elena refused to let him leave another massive tip, so he left $20 on an $11 meal and stepped out into the October evening. The temperature had dropped, autumn asserting itself, reminding everyone that winter was coming. Marcus turned up his collar and walked slowly, thinking about humanity and connection, about the strange mathematics of value. His phone buzzed, a text from Maya. Did you go back to the restaurant? He replied, just left, had the meatloaf, talked to Elena. Good. Keep doing that. You sound different when you talk about that place. Different how? Real. Like the version of you I remember when I was little, before you got so busy being successful. Marcus stopped walking, standing on the sidewalk while people flowed around him, the city moving at its relentless pace.
He remembered Maya at 5, at 7, at 10, remembered taking her to diners for pancakes on Sunday mornings before the company got too big, before success became all-consuming. She'd always ordered chocolate chip pancakes and would carefully save the last bite for him, insisting they share it. When had he stopped being that father? When had he become the man who ate lunch at his desk and couldn't remember the last time he'd shared a meal with someone just because he wanted to? He typed back, "I'm trying to find that version again. I know. I'm proud of you for trying."
The walk home took an hour because Marcus deliberately took the long route, winding through neighborhoods he'd never explored, past shops and restaurants and small churches, places where people built their lives without ever thinking about quarterly earnings or stock prices. His feet hurt by the time he reached his building. His expensive leather shoes were made for boardrooms, not long walks. But he felt more grounded than he had in years. The next morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in a decade. He cleared his schedule. Not for a crisis, not for an emergency meeting, just cleared it. His assistant, Jennifer, stared at him like he'd announced he was joining a circus. "Sir, you have the quarterly review with the board, and the video conference with Tokyo, and—" "Reschedule everything. Tell them I'm taking a personal day." "A personal day?" Jennifer repeated the words like they were in a foreign language. "You haven't taken a personal day since 2015. Then I'm overdue." He spent the morning walking the city, deliberately visiting places he'd never been. A used bookstore where the owner kept a cat that slept on the philosophy section. A small gallery showing work by local artists, abstract paintings that reminded him of Caroline, of the woman she'd been before he'd failed her. A coffee shop where the barista drew elaborate designs in the foam, and the walls were covered in community bulletin boards, advertising yoga classes and apartment shares, and people looking for lost cats. He had lunch at a Korean place where he was the only non-Korean customer, where the owner's mother brought him extra banchan without being asked, smiling and saying something in Korean he didn't understand, but somehow knew meant eat, eat, you're too thin. The food was spectacular, spicy and complex, making his nose run and his eyes water, and he felt more nourished than he had after 100 business dinners. His phone buzzed constantly. Gerald with questions about the Shanghai implementation, Patricia with contract revisions, board members wanting updates. He ignored them all, and the world kept turning. In the afternoon, he visited his ex-wife. Caroline lived in Brooklyn now, in a loft with north-facing windows and walls covered in paintings, hers and others, a riot of color that made his minimalist penthouse seem like a morgue by comparison. She answered the door in paint-stained jeans and an oversized flannel shirt, her gray-streaked hair pulled back with a bandana, and for a moment Marcus saw the woman he'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. "Marcus?" She blinked in surprise. "Is everything okay? Is Maya?" "Maya's fine. Everything's fine. I hadn't planned what to say. Can we talk?" She studied his face, whatever she saw there making her step aside. "Come in." The loft smelled like turpentine and coffee. Canvases leaned against every wall, paintings in various stages of completion. Through the windows, afternoon light poured in, the kind of light painters dreamed about. "You're working again," Marcus said. "For 3 years now. After the divorce, I finally had time to remember who I was before I became Mrs. Marcus Holloway." The words could have been bitter, but they weren't, just honest. They sat at her kitchen table, scarred wood covered in paint splatters, and Marcus told her about the Shanghai deal, about Elena and Rosie's kitchen, about checking the math and finding the error. Caroline listened the way she used to, with her whole attention, seeing things in his face he didn't know were visible. "You sound different," she said when he finished. "Everyone keeps telling me that. Because it's true. You sound like the man I married before the company became everything." Marcus wrapped his hands around the coffee mug.
I'm sorry for that, for forgetting how to be human. Caroline reached across the table, touched his hand, the first time they'd had physical contact in years beyond polite hugs at Maya's graduations. I know. And I'm sorry too, for giving up instead of fighting harder to help you find your way back. You shouldn't have had to fight for that. No, but I loved you. I should have tried anyway. She pulled her hand back, not unkindly. What are you going to do now? I don't know. Keep going to that restaurant. Keep talking to Elena. Keep trying to remember what it feels like to be real. That's good. Don't stop. Caroline smiled, sad and warm. You were always at your best when you were helping people, Marcus. When you were solving problems for real humans, not just maximizing shareholder value. Maybe this waitress reminded you of that. He left Caroline's loft feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. Lighter because old guilts had been spoken aloud. Heavier because he couldn't get back the years he'd lost to ambition. But maybe he could do better with the years ahead. That evening, he returned to Rosie's kitchen. Elena saw him come in and laughed, shaking her head. You're going to single-handedly keep us in business. Just hungry. Liar, you're avoiding your own kitchen. But she was smiling as she led him to a table. The usual? Pot roast or meatloaf? What's Rosie making today? Thursday special. Beef stew with those little potatoes and the carrots that melt in your mouth? Perfect. While he waited for his food, Marcus watched Elena work. She moved between tables with that same efficient grace, but tonight he noticed other things. The way she touched an old man's shoulder gently when she refilled his water, a small gesture of connection. The way she knelt down to talk to a child, making herself small and unthreatening. The way she laughed at a bad joke from a regular customer, her laughter genuine, even though she'd probably heard that joke 100 times. She was good at her job not because she was good at carrying plates, but because she was good at seeing people, at making them feel valued, noticed, cared for. In a different world, with different circumstances, she would have been running her own company, leading teams, making decisions that affected thousands of lives. Instead, she was here, serving beef stew to strangers, and somehow that felt just as important. His phone buzzed. A text from Gerald. Shanghai's getting nervous about the delay. We need to move forward. Marcus typed back. Move forward. I trust you to handle it. Gerald's response was immediate. Are you feeling okay? Never better. You're capable, Gerald. I'm going to start trusting you to prove it. He silenced his phone and focused on the beef stew Elena brought, rich and savory, the kind of food that made you understand why people called it comfort. Can I ask you something? Elena said, pausing at his table with a coffee pot. Always. Why do you keep coming back here? I mean, you could eat anywhere in the world. But you keep showing up at a place where dinner costs $11 and the chairs don't match. Marcus thought about how to answer honestly. Because here, I'm just another customer, not Marcus Holloway, CEO, not the guy worth billions, just someone who needs feeding. And you feed me like I matter, even though you didn't know who I was that first day. You did matter. Everyone who walks through that door matters. I know. That's why I keep coming back. Elena studied him for a moment, and he saw her making calculations, not about money or tips, but about people, about the strange man who'd appeared in her restaurant and changed her life with generous checks and honest conversation. You're lonely, she said finally, aren't you? The observation landed with the weight of truth. Marcus wanted to deny it, wanted to list his friends and colleagues and social obligations, but looking up at Elena, her dark eyes seeing past his expensive suit to something truer underneath, he couldn't lie. Yes, he admitted. I think I have been, for a long time. She nodded slowly, understanding in her face. Me too. It's different kinds of loneliness probably, but it's lonely all the same. Being the person everyone needs, but nobody knows. That's exactly it. Well, Elena refilled his coffee, even though his cup was still half full. You're not alone when you're here. None of us are. That's the point of places like this. After she moved away, Marcus sat with those words, feeling them settle into his chest, like stones dropping into still water. Not alone when you're here. Such a simple truth, but one he'd forgotten in penthouses and corner offices, in meetings where everyone called him Sir, and nobody asked how he actually felt. He finished his stew slowly, making it last, and when he finally left Rosie's kitchen that night, stepping out into the cold October evening, he felt like he was leaving home. Which was absurd. Home was his penthouse with its view and its silence. Home was the place he returned to every night, where he slept alone and woke alone, and spent his hours between walls that cost more per square foot than most people earned in a year. But home, he was learning, wasn't about square footage or views. It was about feeling seen, feeling known, feeling like you mattered as yourself instead of as your accomplishments. He walked slowly, thinking about loneliness and connection, about the strange ways life brought people together. A month ago, he'd never heard of Rosie's kitchen. A month ago, Elena Volkov was just another stranger in a city of 8 million. Now she felt like... what? A friend seemed too simple. A savior seemed too dramatic. Something in between. Something that didn't have a name yet. His phone rang. Maya. Hey, sweetheart. Dad, I was thinking. Thanksgiving is in a few weeks. Instead of the usual thing was dinner at an expensive restaurant, just the two of them, making polite conversation about school and business, while expensive wine went mostly undrunk. What if we did something different? Like what? Like you invite your waitress friend and her mother, and maybe we cook. Actually cook at your place. Make it feel like, I don't know, like family. Marcus stopped walking, standing still while the city moved around him. You want to have Thanksgiving with strangers? They're not strangers to you, and anyway, aren't the best families the ones we choose? Maya's voice was gentle. I'm serious, Dad. I want to meet this woman who changed your life, and I want to see you be real, not performative. Real Thanksgiving, with real people, with actual meaning. Something in Marcus's chest cracked open, warmth flooding through. That's a beautiful idea, Maya. So you'll do it? If Elena agrees, yes. She'll agree. Who turns down Thanksgiving with a billionaire? Someone who doesn't care about billions. Maya laughed. Even better. Ask her, Dad. I'm flying in Wednesday. We'll make it amazing. After they hung up, Marcus stood on the sidewalk for a long time, thinking about Thanksgiving, about family, chosen and otherwise, about the strange and wonderful ways life could change when you paid attention to the right moments. Tomorrow, he'd ask Elena. Tonight, he'd walk home through the cold October air and think about gratitude, about the things that actually mattered, about waitresses and beef stew and daughters who still believed their fathers could learn to be human again. The city gleamed around him, millions of lights against the darkness, millions of lives being lived in apartments and houses and small restaurants where strangers fed each other, and sometimes, if you were very lucky, fed your soul as well. Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of November day that made New York look like a postcard. Marcus woke early, nervous in a way he hadn't been since his first board presentation 30 years ago. Maya had arrived the night before, taking over his kitchen with the confidence of someone who actually knew how to cook, creating lists and timelines that would have impressed his operations team. Relax, Dad, she said, watching him pace. It's just dinner. It's not just dinner. It's... He paused, trying to articulate what it meant. It's different. Maya smiled, understanding more than he said. I know. That's what makes it important. Elena and her mother, Irina, arrived at 2 o'clock. Irina was smaller than Marcus expected, worn thin by illness and hardship, but her eyes were sharp and kind. She carried a bottle of Russian vodka and a dish of something that smelled like herbs and butter. "For the table," she said, in accented English, pressing the dish into his hands. "We do not come empty." Elena looked different out of her apron. Jeans and a soft sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back. She met Marcus's eyes and smiled, nervous and genuine. "Your home is beautiful," she said, looking around the penthouse. "It's too big," Marcus admitted, "but today it feels right." Maya orchestrated everything with surprising grace, pulling Elena into the kitchen, putting Marcus in charge of setting the table, sending Irina to the living room with instructions to relax and direct everyone else. The apartment filled with the smells of roasting turkey, of the sweet potato casserole Maya insisted was essential, of Irina's herb dish warming in the oven. They ate at 4 o'clock, sitting around Marcus's dining table that had never held anything more important than contract negotiations. The food was imperfect, the turkey slightly dry, the gravy lumpy, nothing like the precisely executed meals Marcus usually encountered, but it tasted better than anything he had eaten in years. "To found family," Maya said, raising her glass, "to people who save us without meaning to waitresses and accountants and checking the math." "To fathers who taught wisdom," Elena added, her voice thick with emotion. "To second chances," Marcus finished, "to learning how to be human again." They drank, and Irina cried happy tears, and for 3 hours Marcus forgot about board meetings and quarterly earnings and the weight of empire. He was just a man sharing a meal with people who saw him, really saw him, and chose to be there anyway. After dinner, while Maya and Elena cleaned up despite his protests, Marcus sat with Irina on the couch, looking out at the city lights.
"You have been kind to my daughter," Irina said. "This is not common thing. She saved my company, $55 million. Irina waved her hand dismissively. "Money is nothing. You gave her something better. You saw her. You made her believe she could be more than just waitress. This," she pressed her hand to her chest, "this is the real gift." Marcus felt his throat tighten. She gave me the same gift. She reminded me to pay attention, to trust myself, to be real. "Then you save each other." Irina patted his hand with her small, work-worn one. "This is how life works, when we are lucky." They stayed until almost midnight, talking, laughing, Maya and Elena discovering they'd both read the same obscure philosophy books, arguing happily about Kant and moral imperatives. Marcus watched his daughter's face, seeing her joy, and felt grateful beyond words that she'd pushed him toward this. At the door, saying goodbye, Elena hugged him. "Thank you for everything. For the money, yes, but more for this, for treating us like family. Thank you for the same, for showing me what actually matters." After they left, Marcus and Maya stood at the windows, looking out at the city. "That was perfect, Dad. It really was." "Are you going to keep seeing them, Elena and Irina?" Marcus smiled. "Every week, if they'll have me. Maybe more." "Good." Maya leaned her head on his shoulder, something she hadn't done since she was small. "You seem like yourself again, like the dad I remember." "I'm trying. It's a process. That's all any of us can do." The months that followed brought changes Marcus couldn't have predicted. He went to Rosie's kitchen twice a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just for coffee and conversation. He helped Elena enroll in accounting classes, celebrated when she aced her first exam, commiserated when statistics proved harder than expected. He had lunch with Irina once a month, learning Russian curse words and hearing stories about Moscow before the fall of the Soviet Union. The Shanghai factory deal went through successfully. Holloway Industries continued growing, making money, dominating markets. But Marcus ran it differently now, delegating more,
trusting his team, remembering that numbers represented real people with real lives. He started a program funding education for service workers, inspired by Elena. He took Sundays off completely, a practice that scandalized his board until the company's performance metrics actually improved. And every Thanksgiving after that first one, he spent house filled with chosen family, Elena and Irina, Maya and eventually her girlfriend, Rosie from the kitchen, Thomas the driver, even Gerald and Patricia once they understood what they were being invited into. The meals were never perfect, always too loud, frequently chaotic. They were everything that mattered. Years later, when Elena graduated with her accounting degree and Marcus offered her a position as CFO, which she accepted after making him promise she could still waitress one shift a week at Rosie's, just to remember, he stood at her graduation and felt proud in a way that had nothing to do with profit margins. She'd saved him that first day in the restaurant, and he'd saved her back. And together, they'd both learned that salvation often came from the most unexpected places, from checking the math one more time, from trusting strangers, from remembering that at the end of everything, we're all just people trying to feed each other and be fed in return. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to pay attention to the unexpected moments that can change your life, please subscribe to our channel. We share stories of human connection, of second chances, of the wisdom that comes from the most surprising places. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of listeners who believe in the power of checking the math and checking in with our humanity. Thank you for listening, and remember, sometimes the most valuable advice comes from people who don't even know they're giving it.